a professor at Brandeis University's Heller School, the author of numerous books. His latest is Debtor's Prison, The Politics of Austerity versus Possibility. The website is prospect.org. His Twitter is rkuttner, R-K-U-T-T-N-E-R, or at the Prospect. Robert Kuttner, it seems like it's been a couple of years since we've talked. It's been a while anyway. Welcome back to the program.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us today. You had this totally bizarre phone call from Steve Bannon a few days ago, or last week, and turned it into an article, and it's gone all over the world. And now Steve Bannon has been booted out of the White House. Tell us what's going on here.
Well, I think he was on pretty thin ice even before that story's coming out. I think Kelly increasingly felt that it was either Bannon or him. I think the president was getting increasingly annoyed at Bannon's freelancing. And I think the fact that he called me is an indication of his recklessness. I mean, he knew that he was on the ropes, and he was inviting me to come see him at the White House after Labor Day. He was also saying, if you and your listeners have read the interview, some incredibly reckless and incautious things about other people at the White House, about his boss's Korea policy. And I think, the Greeks used to say character is fate. And I think there's a grandiosity and a kind of hubris, another Greek concept, about this guy that's very reminiscent of Donald Trump.
I was, I read your piece when it first came out and discussed it at some length, in fact, here on this program over several days. And I was wondering out loud on the air, and I'd love to get, a reality check from you because you're the guy who was there, if it's possible that Bannon knew that he was under siege, or maybe even not that. My initial thought was, okay, John Kelly has basically broken this direct line of communication between Bannon and Trump. Bannon can no longer just walk into the White House whenever he wants.
No, but just pause on that for a second, because we know that Trump has a habit of making phone calls at all off hours. And I think anybody who thinks that Trump is still not going to be in touch with Bannon, even if Bannon is no longer at the White House, is kind of naive, because he depends on this guy. Bannon is the architect of his white supremacist strategy. Trump has doubled down on that. He needs Bannon, and even though he was irritated that Bannon was freelancing and contradicting him, even my bet would be, even when Bannon's out of the White House, Trump is going to continue to be in touch with him.
That makes sense. I was wondering if he was just trying to get around Kelly to get a message to Trump via you, but apparently not.
No, I don't. I don't think so, because what's really interesting here is that the first day after this broke, Bannon claimed he hadn't realized that we were off the record. And, of course, the ground rules are when you get a phone call from a White House official who doesn't bother to say that we're on background, the assumption is that we're on the record. That's
right, and this guy's a publisher, and he's been in the media business for 20 years. He knows this.
Yeah. But I think the second day he changed his tune and gave an interview with, of all places, the Daily Mail of London, and said, well, in fact, this was deliberate. I deliberately put this out to distract the media's attention from their obsession with Charlottesville. So, number one, he changes his spin from day to day. He directly contradicted himself. And number two, of course, if that was his game plan, it certainly did work, because A, Trump is doubling down on the white supremacy strategy, and B, there's more of a media frenzy about that than ever. So I think what happens is you get too full of yourself and you start making errors. And he's very smart. He's very strategic. Some of his strategy makes sense. Some of it's lunatic. I think one of the other really crazy things is his assumption that putting together some kind of grand left-right coalition on trade policy could cut ice at the Trump White House. Now, it's true that some of the criticisms that nationalist conservatives have made about America being taken to the cleaners by China are not all that dissimilar from criticisms that guys like me make and trade unionists make. But can you imagine Donald Trump walking into a meeting of the National Security Council and Defense Department, the State Department, and U.S. Trade Rep saying, hey, you'll never guess what I got. Bob Kuttner supports me on this.
Right.
I mean, that alone would be, hey, you're fired.
Yeah.
So I think you get too full of yourself, you make errors of judgment. And I think that's what happened here.
That's very interesting. You know, in this business, in the radio and TV business, I've always said, you know, when you begin to believe your own PR, you're in huge trouble. And I've known more than one person who has gone down that road. And I, you know, between myself and my wife, who also produces the program, she does a really good job of keeping me grounded on this stuff. But it seems like Steve Bannon has nobody in his life who is you know, helping him have a little perspective, and he himself has lost it. What does this mean for our country?
Well, it means that the Trump White House is more chaotic than ever. I mean, they've fired the chief of staff, they fired the chief political strategist, they fired the communications director. This is not a good sign, and it means that Trump himself, with all of his craziness, is more in charge without people giving him advice. I think the two people who may have some influence are Kelly. We'll see how long he lasts, and not clear how much influence Pence has. Trump distrusts him because Pence is sort of looking beyond Trump's ouster to his administration.
Yeah.
Brutus Cohn came close to sending signals that he might have to resign over the anti-Semitism. So I guess what I'm waiting for is for the Republicans to recognize what a total catastrophe this is for the country and get on board either an impeachment or an ouster under the 25th Amendment. I mean, we're not there yet, right, but you can see this vectoring in on that end game.
Or option 3 is the Howard Baker phone call. You know, Howard Baker famously called Richard Nixon, Howard Baker, you know, the leading Republican in the Senate, and called Richard Nixon and said, you know, it's time to resign. If you don't, we're going to take you down.
That was after impeachment had begun. And, I mean, I think the closest equivalent of that would be Mueller tenders his report, Democrats in the House file an impeachment inquiry, and maybe they get enough Republicans in the House to join them, and then the fight is on.
Right.
But that's very protracted. That could take a while. You know, anything could happen. I mean, there are people who are saying that Trump could resign. So I don't. I certainly didn't see this coming with Bannon. The last thing in the world I expected on my vacation was Stephen Bannon picking up the phone and calling me. So I'm not going to try and crystal ball what the end game is, but I think there will be an end game.
Yeah, I agree, and I share your perception. In fact, I've been saying on this program for some time that the day that the Republican Party institutionally, the majority, you know, the tipping point is reached in the Republican Party, and the penny drops, that all this chaos in the White House, you know, even though they're giving the polluting industries and the billionaires, particularly the petro-billionaires, the Koch network, everything they want through Scott Pruitt at the EPA and Ryan Zinke at Interior and Betsy DeVos in education. I mean, there's just some real evil stuff going on in these areas, real destructive stuff to our democracy and very, very helpful to the billionaires and their companies, even though they're getting everything they want there. The real big prizes are taking down Social Security, which today we just learned the Trump administration is in their next budget. They're going to, Trump is asking 1/4 of the Social Security workforce to take early retirement, which means that Social Security is going to be broken next year. That you're not even.
He's flailing in a number of different directions, and one of the things you don't take on in this country is Social Security. But I think you raise a very important larger point, and that is that while we are preoccupied with this carnival sideshow that is Donald Trump and Stephen Bannon, the alliance of the Republicans, the mainstream Republicans, who are really the far-right Republicans, and the Trump administration, is assaulting everything else that we hold dear, and we have to keep our eye on that ball as well.
Yeah. But where I was going with that is when the Republicans realize that they're not going to get their tax cuts, they're not going to get, you know, the end of Social Security, they're not going to get Medicare destroyed. I mean, they're Medicaid anyway. They already tried that. It didn't work. Once they realize that the chaos in the White House is preventing this from happening, they're going to say, you know, Mike Pence would not be this chaotic. Mike Pence would just, you know, be the good lieutenant who signs whatever we give him, and he's going to keep his mouth shut, and we're going to have a no-drama White House. It's time for a change. And when that happens, when when that critical mass is achieved in the Republican Party, you know, there'll be a few Democrats along for the ride, but I think the Republicans are going to take Trump down. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the question is when enough Republicans cross over that line. And every time he's done something completely crazy in the past, we said, okay, this is it. This is
Right.
it. And you would have thought that Charlottesville, followed by Trump doubling down on the neo-Nazi stuff, would be it. That would be it. But it isn't.
Yeah, we thought this when the Access Hollywood tapes came out.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, you can go down the whole litany.
Yeah. Yeah, it's remarkable. Robert Kuttner, you're doing great work. The American Prospect, the co-founder.
This is great work that I didn't think I was going to do, but I was intrigued that it happened.
You were the right man at the right place at the right time. It's brilliant.
All right, my friend.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Robert Kuttner, thank you so much for being with us. And your latest book, Debtor's Prison, The Politics of Austerity versus Possibility, and people can check out Prospect. Thank you, Robert.
Take care.